Page layout is often defined as one of the most important graphic design disciplines. Its fundamental aspect, namely the careful control of visual hierarchy, has a strong bearing on every other area of graphic design. Improving or simply extending your page layout skills will enable you to more effectively communicate and market ideas. Designs that extend across multiple pages, whether in books, magazines, brochures, or newspapers, are referred to as page layout or editorial designs. As a reader of the printed page, we all have the experience of the reassurance and comfort that comes from holding paper pages in our hands, knowing that we'll have those pages for as long as we choose to keep that particular publication. The printed page allows for more typographic and compositional design variety than on screen. Unlike screen-based designs, designers don't have to weigh the balance of accessibility versus aesthetics. When you're confronted with a page layout project, one of the first tasks of the designer is to read the text in detail to really get a good understanding of what's being discussed. The designer, as a reader, is taking on the role of the target audience, and you must interpret the intended hierarchy and possibly augment or suggest alternatives that will improve audience understanding of and participation with the design. Hierarchical control is the effective sequencing of the separate visual elements that make up each design. This gives the reader easy access to information in an order that is carefully and skillfully controlled. The degree of design-led control can result to some surprising designs. You want to encourage readers to engage with the editorial design. This is a vital role to you as a graphic designer. The topic of a design may not be of a particular interest to an audience, but as a professional designer, it's your job not only to attract attention, but also to hold interest. It's really important that you guarantee that information is assessed in the manner and order that you intended, and ideally, you should ensure that the audience enjoys the experience of interacting with your design. The reader needs to be tempted by small little chunks of information. Think of digestible amounts of information, and they need to be presented in a recognizable order. Page layout needs to, in many situations, communicate a great deal of complex information. The layout is just not created simply to provide visual interest, but it's also to ensure that the audience can take on as much information as possible. The visual hierarchy and organization of a design can be controlled using a combination of imagery, typography, texture, tone, color, strong groupings, a flexible grid system, and changing the scale of the elements that you're using. All of these elements can come together under the careful guidance of the designer, and this is going to drive the overall visual aesthetics of a project. You're definitely going to want to use grids. Grids are going to play a useful role in almost any graphic design genre or project, but in page layout, the grid structure is vital to organization. The grid is going to allow you to produce a cohesiveness, and it can improve legibility and the communication of the ideas. You always want to use grids that will allow for a lot of design flexibility. We're going to be looking specifically at brochures. The word brochure is kind of a broadly applied term, and it refers to printed material. They're usually folded, sometimes stitched, sometimes with pockets for inserts, and brochures are going to come in many sizes and shapes. They can be designed to fit budgets large and small. A brochure is basically an advertising tool for a business and other organizations. It gives the business owner a chance to sum up everything the customer needs to know in an easy-to-read, eye-catching piece of paper. Brochures should be the size that makes them easy to place in public areas, perhaps mailing envelopes, or sometimes they're set in display shelves such as travel centers or restaurants or hotels or motels. A brochure will sell the business to a potential customer. Brochures, and often web pages as well, are going to provide the public with their first view of a company or organization. It's really crucial that these sources of information portray the client in a way that is seen as advantageous to their purpose, both visually and content-wise. Creating a brochure is an exercise that's going to use both sides of the designer's brain. The right side needs to determine the right fee for the piece using both emotional and factual information, which is going to be gathered through various channels. And the left side of the brain is going to be in charge of practical considerations such as budget matters, production challenges, writing, coordinating. You're going to be dealing with individuals that are going to be involved in the piece's development and production. When you're designing a brochure, a couple of considerations to definitely think of are knowing the print size. One of the most common errors made by people who create brochures, and it's also one of the most challenging to correct once you've kind of already committed yourself, is an incorrect setup for the size of the brochure. So all too often a print layout has to be returned to the customer because it wasn't set up for the proper output size. If you want to create something that is intended to be printed on an 8 by 10 paper, then don't use an 8.5 by 11 layout and submit it to be printed. When a print service has to stretch or shrink the layout of your design, then the quality of the print resolution may be compromised. So always figure out what the print size is prior to designing. You're also going to want to allow for a bleed. A print bleed is basically, you can kind of think of it as an insurance policy to make your final printed brochure look its best. Brochures are printed together in sheets and then they're sliced into a single unit. The blade that cuts across the brochure it's pretty precise, but when cutting thousands of pieces, it can fluctuate slightly over the course of a print run. So when you expand your brochure design slightly beyond the established page border, then when the page is cut, you'll have solid ink coverage from edge to edge. And this is very imperative, especially if you have a photo, color, or a pattern, something that needs to be displayed to the extreme edge of your brochure layout. When you design a brochure that's going to be full bleed, you want to design with an extra 1/8 of an inch of coverage beyond each edge. That's pretty much what's recommended, but always check with your printer for specific or exact specifications. Resolution. When you're printing a brochure, you definitely want to use high resolution images in your layout. This is a critical step towards creating a professional looking final brochure. If you submit something to be printed that isn't the proper resolution, then your images are going to come out blurry, they'll kind of look soft, they'll even perhaps be pixelated. When you look at images on your computer monitor, you're only seeing 72 dpi or 72 dots per inch. This is totally fine for viewing anything on a monitor, but it's very inadequate for a professional looking printed brochure. Your images need to be at least 300 dpi to print clearly and with full sharpness. You can get images in high resolution format by taking the pictures yourself or having a professional take them. You can also purchase high quality or high resolution images from there's just a plethora of stock image websites on the web, and some of them are, quite affordable. And if you use these in your design will really benefit from it. The next thing you need to know is you need to use the correct paper. Most print shops that print brochures offer either a 80-pound or a 100-pound stock paper, and that's just kind of like a base. But they also offer a variety of gloss and matte finishes. It's really going to be your choice and your customer's choice in the end, but I would definitely recommend spending the extra money to get the 100-pound stock if you're wavering between a 100-pound and 80-pound stock. It's quite a bit more substantial than the 80-pound stock, and the cost is not very large when it really comes down to it. When you're using a heavier paper, you may convince a potential customer that you're more professional than your competitors. Other things that you can do on the paper is you could add a varnish. This adds a really nice gloss to your brochure. If your design has a lot of ink coverage, your brochure will appear to be glossy anyways. But if you use a lot of dark colors in your brochure design, using a varnish is going to prevent fingerprint smudges on your brochure. These are very noticeable on black and dark colored brochures. And then, of course, be original and be creative. Carefully consider what you want to say with your brochure. What information are you trying to convey? I definitely recommend looking at the competitors and see what approach they're taking in their advertising materials, and really kind of do your research and find out What makes other brochure designs leap out at you? Why do you find them enticing? What makes them really good? Remember that the fronts of your brochures are all people are going to see when they're scanning a display rack. So make sure that the front of your brochure is appealing and make prospective customers want to pick it up. A brochure, it's part of your business identity. When you create a brochure, you are creating your business identity. It's a big part of it. A well-designed brochure that's professionally printed can be worth a great deal more than its cost. So knowing what printers are looking for when it comes to actually getting it printed and having a little bit more information up front is going to allow you to be able to successfully print a brochure without having to deal with aggravation and perhaps errors that might hinder the process of getting something printed.